we come in after the break, we have a slight program change due to one speaker not being available this morning. As a replacement, we will have Dr. Raymon Krishnan. He's the president of the Logistics and Supply Chain Management Society. Dr. Krishnan has been the president for some time, and under his tenure, we've seen the birth of LogiSYM and its continuation. I think we're in our 14th year in Malaysia. LogiSYM Malaysia has actually been running longer than LogiSYM Singapore, which is an interesting point. All right, so woohoo, go Malaysia. Malaysia Boleh, for a good reason. Dr. Raymon has now more than 3 decades of experience in logistics and transportation, which he will be bringing that to bear on his topic on the supply chain outlook in the short to mid-term for logisticians. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Raymon.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can all of you hear me? Oops, wrong one. How is that? Is that better? All right, so now you can't see my face. Okay, so good morning. You know, when we know it's a good event, it's when you have difficulty getting people back in after the break. Because, you know, if you're speaking to someone boring in the coffee line or the breakfast line, you'll say, I think I better go in and find an excuse to move out and come back in. So it's quite good. It's also quite noisy. And you know, I've got good news for you. Those of you who are in the room this morning are the best and brightest in logistics and supply chain in Malaysia. Anyone knows why? You all managed to find a hotel with the car park. Yeah. It was a bit of an exercise, yeah, so well done. Thank you very much for turning up this morning. Yeah. So as Stephanie said, I'm the stand-in, right? We had Yap Van Half, we had a family emergency. So I'm going to be talking about the supply chain outlook in the short to medium term for logisticians. So we had an excellent keynote by Nazri this morning, right? Setting the pace, looking at it from a macro level. But one of the things that we do at the Logistics Society, and I've got some of my colleagues here, we work with individuals who work in supply chain. Many of us who work or speak. I work as a logistics manager, that's my full-time job. Kendrick, who's the MC, he says he works for Western Digital, right? Marco, who's the organizing chair, he's a halal supply chain expert and consultant. So we are not event organizers, we're people who actually work in logistics and supply chain management. Right? I've got some of my other colleagues. I've got Inba Rajan, he's ex-Heineken, works for a brewery now. I've got my colleague Roger Chew. He's the MD of a very successful SME supply chain or logistics company. Yeah. And if I've missed out anyone, please, no offense to you, but that's the people who put LogiSYM together, right? So one of those benefits that we have is we actually are people working in the industry. So we are by the industry for the industry. And we face these challenges ourselves. Right, so it's good at looking at things at 30,000 feet. This is my problem, etc., etc. But what I'm going to try and do is talk about some of the realities that we have and what can we do about it, right? Because I also find that very often when you come to a presentation or an event, again, people are talking at a very high level, but what do you do when the rubber meets the road? So that's what I'm going to try and cover. And we've also got Mentimeter, so you can ask questions anonymously. And don't worry, if I don't know the answer, I'll try and make something up. All right? So, with that, we all know, right? Supply chain brought to the fore, but confusion still exists. Yeah? COVID-19, we had all these disruptions. But I can tell you, one of the things that I see, and we are our own worst enemies, is that we ourselves get confused about what logistics and supply chain is. I was on a global call with some of my global colleagues, right? And we had to explain to them what Incoterms 2020 is, and what is FOB and what is XWorks. You know how embarrassing that is, speaking to the global logistics of $1 billion company and explaining to him we're doing things outside of what you're supposed to do in terms of Incoterms. So even though it's brought it to the fore, one of the things that we all need to realize and understand, there's still a lot of confusion about what it is that we do, right? A lot of terminology and applications. We had the gentleman from OCR talking about SDS and ECCN, right? How many of you heard that during the presentation? I've worked in the industry for 30 years, and it's only last year that I stopped calling an MSDS and SDS, or started calling an SDS and MS instead of calling it MSDS. So I had one of my small shipping clerks say, hey boss, people don't use MSDS anymore. It's supposed to be SDS, right? Safety Data Sheet. So there's a lot of terminology and applications. Digitalization. We say digitization, but actually how much do we really know about what we need to do, what we need to implement, etc., etc.? And who does what in the supply chain and how can we make it better? So, yes, I still say there's a lot of confusion that still exists. Anyone don't agree with that statement? No? Good. Silence means dissent. If you're married, you know what I mean. Okay. So, what are we looking at in the supply chain today? We still have to contend with a lot of significant uncertainty. Unfortunately, my slide only goes up to February 2023. But what we're seeing is that in those three lines, the stocks of finished goods versus what are purchased and your supplier's delivery times are all different, right? Demand doesn't meet supply. I had the CEO of my company say to me the other day, we have back orders for $30 million or $60 million. How come you've got $24 million of inventory sitting in your APAC DC? I said, boss, we have red shirts in the DC, but the customer is ordering blue shirts. And the raw materials we need for the blue shirts, we cannot get, right? So supply doesn't meet demand. What we have available isn't what the customer needs. And we're seeing that across all different industries. Any of you, again, don't agree with that? I was talking to my colleague, Inba. I mentioned him earlier, and he told me this morning, he's responsible for S&OP at the brewery that he works with. And just imagine making something as simple as beer. And he was telling me that if he takes leave for one day, his S&OP plan goes off the rails. Right? Can you imagine that? Something as straightforward, and in the company that he works with, in the country that he works with, he tells me, what's it, Inba, how many bottles of beer does the average Cambodian drink a day? Yeah, the average Cambodian adult drinks 24 cans of beer a day. Can you imagine that? I think the whole country is mabuk, man. Okay? But, and making something as straightforward as beer, right? And it's the largest brewery in Cambodia, by the way, or second largest, yeah? And they cannot get their S&OP right, even if he takes leave for one day. I think he's doing it deliberately also so that he can remain employed, but that's what we're seeing. Supply doesn't meet demand, and there's that huge uncertainty. Oh, sorry, I was on a different slide. That was what I was talking about. Okay. The other thing that we're seeing, we're hearing about slowdown in trade, right? I'm sure my colleague Kendrick will talk about this tomorrow. But 3PLs and carriers are now being challenged. What has happened this last couple of years? They've taken advantage of the situation. We've been paying peak season surcharge, especially when you talk to the integrators. They've been leveraging and taking advantage of the industry, paying $20,000 per TEU from Shanghai to West Coast USA, Trans-Pacific eastbound. Right? I'm sure we've all heard those horror stories. But today, what are we seeing? Significant slowdown in demand, right? And you look at MSC. Another interesting thing about this slide is, for the first time in X number of years, MSC has overtaken MERS as the largest carrier in the world. Quite good news to see AP Moller knocked off the top. But the second thing is, look at the capacity of their fleet deployment. MSC is only deploying less than 70% of its fleet available capacity. So ocean freight demand on most trade lanes is flat and capacity is higher than demand. So the 3PLs and carriers that have had a good run this last couple of years are now facing a lot of challenges. I'm sure we are seeing this, right? Yeah, I can move a container for $100, $200 intra-Asia now compared to a couple of years ago. Raw material cost. According to KPMG, 71% of global companies highlight raw material costs as their number one supply chain threat for 2023. None of this, I think, of what I've been saying for the last few minutes is shocking news to any of you. And then along with all that, we've got conflict, armed and trade related, right? We've got the US-China trade wars. We've got, of course, Ukraine happening, right? So there's conflict. We as logisticians, this last couple of years, pre-COVID, there were murmurings of ESG, Sustainable Development Goals. But now in the last couple of years, ESG is all of a sudden a fancy title, right? You know, I was talking to a potential partner of LogiSYM yesterday. Or Hajit, where's Hajit? Jack, where are you, Jack? Jack's probably smoking somewhere. Okay, so we're talking to a potential partner yesterday. And this lady works for a company that sells software that helps you measure your carbon footprint. Okay, so we asked her, so scope 1, scope 3, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. So we said, hey, great, we understand the significance of sustainability and the focus on ESG, but what's your selling point to your customer? Why would Dell or Western Digital or Heineken want to buy your software? She said, oh, it's mainly for the feel-good factor. Okay, I almost fell off my chair. How many of us are going to buy software for the feel-good factor? Yeah, if you are that sort of person, we've got OCR, we've got Boomi, we've got a lot of software providers here who are willing to talk to you if you are going to buy software for the feel-good factor. Yeah, but there is a strong emphasis on sustainability, and very frankly speaking, I would challenge most supply chain professionals in this room. Most of us don't know what to do, right? How are you going to make your supply chain more sustainable? I think many of us are confused. Yeah, maybe you can ship from air freight to ocean freight. Yes, maybe you can use recyclable packaging. Maybe you can use energy efficient lighting in your warehouse. But aside from that, at a very superficial level, myself included, I'm not sure what to do. Okay, and then people, right? I think Nazri talked a bit about it as well. But with the new workforce, how many of you are familiar with what happens in Singapore? Did you all see the announcement a couple of days by one of our ministers about this new digitalization program skills that they're implementing in Singapore? I think the Singaporeans in the room know about it, yeah? So I had a big argument at home. I said, yeah, this is another useless Singaporean government propaganda thing. They say that there's going to be 700 new digitalization jobs in 2025. Big deal. Why is that news? And which Singapore government initiative to develop supply chain professionals actually works? I haven't seen any. Okay? So, but on the people front, we are seeing this new emphasis on different skills. We have people who want flexible work, although I'm seeing that change, yeah? People are coming back to the offices. I think they're all tired of staying at home. Then there's diversity and inclusion, DEI, employee value propositions. In the new workforce that we have coming, I see we've got a few students who are in the room today. The values or what they want to look for in a new job are different perhaps from our generation. And then we have weather and natural disasters that we're hearing and talking about, and increased digitalization. So, along with all this, and that investment in digital supply chains, that excuse me, that investment is growing. So, what are business leaders and logisticians doing? Ignorance is bliss. I'm seeing some of you read LogiSYM magazine, and one of my messages a few months ago, I'm seeing a lot of people just ignore things, right? Ignorance is bliss. We'll just bury our heads in the sand and react to what happens in the marketplace. Or we have a case of the wobbles. That's what I'm experiencing. I think that was my message last month. A lot of CEOs, a lot of leaders, business leaders, whether they're supply chain leaders or sales or business leaders in the company, they are unsure of what to do. So they chop and change and follow every new trend. And it's very, very dangerous. Those of you who work in companies know. Sometimes a CEO will say something and he'll say it in passing. But then the company takes it as, oh, this is, the manager or the director or the vice president in the company takes this and thinks, oh, this is the gospel truth. CEO said that he wants it done this way, right? And then we go and start off this new trend. But actually, he just said it in passing. Have you all ever experienced that? Yeah. I give you this example. I was in the army in Singapore and I was in training in India one day. Okay, Singapore Army, we train in India. Of course, we're too small. If you fire a cannon, right, in Singapore, we'll land in Malaysia. So there'll be World War III or 2.5. So we train in India, Australia, etc., etc. So one day, we were going to this rendezvous point, and my CO, my commanding officer, said to this Indian general, he said, we had such a hard time finding your way. There's also a story about the Singapore Army. But anyway, we had a hard time getting to the rendezvous point. So you know what this Indian... And he said it in passing. And it's either classified or censored. Huh? Okay. So anyway, he just said it in passing to this Indian general. And then we went to sleep at about 2 a.m. When we woke up at 6 a.m. the next morning, you know what this guy had done? He got his soldiers during the night to put markers on the road for about 1 kilometer and paint the markers. Basically, he went to get stones in the middle of the desert, place them in a straight line so that we can reach the lager point. But actually, the comment was just made by my CO in passing. It was hard finding this place. That's why we were late. But the general heard what my colonel said and took it as the gospel truth, and he made his soldiers work throughout the night. I don't know how many of them did it, and I don't know where they found so many stones and so much white paint in the desert to paint about 1 kilometer of markers so that we could reach a lager point. So there's a lot of these wrong messages also happening in the companies or the supply chains that we manage. And then we revert to old ways of doing things. How many of us are doing that? I'm seeing that happen as well. What we did in 2019, we're going back to the way we did it then. We're just ignoring the new opportunities or taking this last couple of years in COVID as an opportunity to look at things differently. And then some of us are just frozen in place, no idea what to do. How many of you work with people like that? Especially if it's your boss. Quite debilitating, right? And then we've got people who are leveraging and seeing the confusion as an opportunity. So hopefully we fall into that last category. I'll give you an example. For LogiSYM, COVID was one of the best things that ever happened. Anyone want to guess why? Just imagine, we've been running LogiSYM Malaysia for 14 years, right? We run in Singapore, we run in Dubai, Vietnam. So with COVID in 2020, our costs dropped because we didn't have to have a physical venue, right? We didn't have a physical venue to run a symposium. We ran everything online. So our revenue increased because everyone was stuck at home. And remember in 2020, everyone was listening to webinars and signing up for it.
Our largest webinar or our largest symposium, 35,000 participants. Largest supply chain webinar or symposium in the world. So COVID was good for us. Our cost went down. We just used Zoom or we used another software. And we have 35,000 participants in a conference with so many sponsors. So that's just an example. Leveraging and seeing the confusion as an opportunity. You pivot, you leverage, you collaborate. This is something I just saw released by BCG just on the 10th of July. So it's very, very current. According to BCG, what they say we could be doing as supply chain leaders, digitalization. Yeah, Nazri's talked about that earlier. I'm sure many of our speakers are going to talk about it. We've got a presentation on generative AI, or is it regenerative AI? Generative AI, I think. Yeah. Creating resilience. It requires a transformation program. Why? Because many of us are just used to reacting, especially when we work in the supply chain. The supply chain is an essential component of enterprise social and governance, ESG. We talked about that. And transforming the supply chain will mean building foundational capability. So building our people. Nothing new. We talked about that as well. But if you get the chance, I see quite a fair few of you taking a picture of this presentation. Go and look at that BCG report. I sent it to a few of the council members last night as well. I found it quite interesting what we can do. Okay, so I think this is my second last slide. What could we be doing? Like I said, when the rubber meets the road, as a logistics manager, as a service provider, as a 3PL, some of you are 4PLs. What could we be doing? Strategic partnerships. Don't just think transactionally. I put there mend fences. Why? I think those of us who procure a lot of freight, I used to be responsible up until early this year to buy $125 million a year of air freight. Okay, so I had a global function doing $125 million a year of air freight procurement. So we work with any of the freight forwarders, you name them, we work with them, right? But these last couple of years, they've been taking advantage of the situation with a lot of premium pricing. There's been a lot of antagonistic arguments. Those of you who ship sea freight as well. But this is the time for us to think strategically. Don't just think transactionally. Mend fences, and maybe even work with your competition. Those of you who know me, my doctorate, my research was on combined distribution networks. Combined distribution networks is not about collaborating with your friends and your family and your vertical and backward and forwards integration. Combined distribution networks is about getting you, a company, to work with your competition. So maybe work with your competitors. That's what we're doing. And I can tell you how and why we do that during the break maybe. Pivot, exit markets, change business models. Again, I used to work in a company during the Asian economic crisis. No, the GFC was when? 2009? Was that the global financial crisis, 2009? I worked for a $5 billion company. And you know what we decided in 2009? And I was surprised when we did it, yeah? I was a much younger guy, 14 years ago. The company, $5 billion, said, we will exit the China market. So I thought he was joking. When my CEO said this, I thought he was on drugs, American guy. He said, no, we will exit the Chinese market. So that's what we did. We had the global financial crisis in 2009. We pivoted and we said, to hell with it. Many Western companies go to China, lose their shirt, their pants, their everything else, right? It's not profit making. We'll just exit the market altogether. And true enough, the following year, we had record profits and margin just by ignoring and exiting one of the largest markets in the world. Okay? Revert to the old ways of doing things. How we did things back in 2018, 2019. Is this necessarily a bad thing? So we could do that. What we should be doing, I think, is networking and learning. So I've got LogiSYM up there, I've got Cargo Now. Really take the opportunity, work with your peers, talk to your peers at a forum like this, right? And listen to people. I was in the Philippines last week, okay? And being from Singapore, a lot of us like to think that, Singaporeans are the best. We are logistics experts. We run the biggest port in the world or second largest port in the world, right? I think Singapore is well known as a logistics hub. But I was talking to a colleague in the Philippines last week, and he gave me this very good advice that I didn't think about. So do that. Network, learn, work with other people, and you'll be surprised what you find out. And similar to what I said in my previous slide, leveraging and seeing the confusion as an opportunity. COVID is unusual. We've never had such a situation before. But those of us who work in supply chain see black swan events happening all the time. A volcano eruption, conflict in Ukraine. If you work in supply chain, disruptions are normal. Someone was complaining to me, and I joked about it at the start this morning, because someone sent me a WhatsApp message complaining, it's so hard to find the car park. I said, if you can't find the car park, maybe you shouldn't come to LogiSYM. If you're that dumb, right? If you can't leverage and see the confusion as an opportunity, and if you don't think it's worth doing, please don't come. So thank you again to all of you who turned up today. With that, any questions? No questions means I'm either very good or very bad. We have a hand here just to save me the embarrassment. Yeah, standing up here.
Sorry, you mentioned something about ESG. So was the previous speaker, and one of the things that concern logistics would be the scope 1 to 3, particularly scope 3. Now, how do you deal with that? Because in the layers of vendors that you need to comply with the ESG requirement, especially on the GHG protocol. Is you got any comment on that?
Yes, no comment. No, it is a challenge, yeah. And that's why I said many of us as supply chain professionals actually attended a job interview about 2 months ago for a very large milk producer. And that was one of the questions they asked me at the interview, and maybe that's why I didn't get the job. He said, how do you deal with scope 3? I said, to be honest, even with all the work I do at the Logistics Society, I'm supposed to be an expert, etc., there isn't that one tool, there isn't that visibility. And I can tell you, I also don't think, and some of you might agree, I know my wife will disagree with this, most companies don't care about ESG. It's just a buzzword that I'm talking about. When I say many, I'm talking about 70-80%. There are some that really care, but most don't. They talk about sustainability because that's what people are talking about. They are not willing to invest in it. They are not willing to find a solution. And when you talk about scope 3, managing your upstream suppliers and the vendors that you work with, I really don't see a tool that's out there. So it's still a nut that we're trying to crack. The society, we have an initiative under the Shippers Council to look at this, but the answer is that we do not have an answer. It's a challenge. If anyone in the audience has a solution for us, I'd be very keen to know this as well. Scope 3, how do we deal with that? Scope 1 is easy. Yeah? No? Any other questions? Oh, what about freight rates? Do you see them going up or down? Okay. My forecast, I mentioned that up until March of this year, I used to spend about $125 million in freight. In January, I said that freight rates will drop for my air freight. It's going to drop by at least $10 million. On top of that, I'm going to move from air freight to ocean freight and drop that down by another $35 million. Okay, so the long and short answer is yes, freight rates are going down. They're not going to drop down to 2019 levels. I don't think we'll see 2019 come back again. But freight rates are going down, and they should stay down and continue heading down up until Q1 or Q2 next year. So every year at the end of the year, I actually do a forecast of what the year what the year ahead looks like. If you go to my LinkedIn profile, you'll see the interview I did with Channel News Asia. I was spot on. So I'm quite arrogant about it. Rates are going to go down. They're going to stay down until after Chinese New Year. Okay. What keeps you up at night? Oh, working with idiots. Okay. I'm in this unenviable position of working with people. Yes, from a logistics perspective, so working with logistics people, I had a boss up until last year who didn't know how to spell logistics. So after sending him 2 or 3 emails, those of you who know me, right, I get very irritated when people spell logistics wrong. I even have it on my laptop, right? Okay. But seriously, my boss, the global head of this multinational company, did not know how to spell logistics. So if you don't know how to spell the job that you're doing, you really don't know your job. And I can give you a lot of other examples. So what keeps me up at night is that confusion that exists amongst us as so-called fellow professionals. We ourselves don't want to do our jobs well enough, or take that risk, or take that effort, or have that mindset to try and change. And with that, how do you expect the rest of the world to actually take us seriously? So that keeps me up at night. How are you addressing it? That's why we continue to strive at the Logistics Society. Yeah? Wow, 100%. Yeah, I don't think I can stand up here and say anything else, right? Yeah. But no, we do need to move towards more sustainable things that we do. Yeah, but don't just greenwash. Another one of my pet peeves. You know, you go to McDonald's now and you cannot get a straw, right? Yes, you know, you go to many restaurants, you cannot get a straw. Yes, it is a more sustainable practice, but why do you think they were so happy to implement this? It improves their bottom line. They don't have to supply us with straws anymore. McDonald's probably makes millions of dollars from not doing it, right? Carbon offsetting. Those of you who work in air freight, or those of you who do air freight, sustainable aviation fuels and carbon offsetting. You're seeing a lot of major 3PLs come up with SAF and carbon offsetting initiatives. But it's just greenwashing. You are buying carbon credits, paying more for air freight to report that you're more carbon friendly. But you know what's happening? It's not actually based on the air freight that you're moving. You're offsetting, say, Singapore to Manila, but when actually you're shipping from Singapore to New York. Are you all seeing that? Yeah? So, greenwashing. So, do we need to be more sustainable? Yes, but real efforts towards sustainability. Okay? So, we're all logistics professionals in this room. Okay? It's good for us, what? We get paid more. Okay? I think there's some of that, but I think, you know, I'll use a Singapore example. GST in Singapore went up from 7% to 8%. Right? Am I correct? It went up from 7 to 8%. But when you go, there's a very famous food chain, Toast Box. Every day, 3 o'clock, I'm either at Yakun Kaya Toast Box, or having eggs and toast bread. GST went up 1%, but Toast Box raised the prices for their value meals by $2. So it was $6, they raised it to $8. So there was a big hue and cry in the marketplace against Toast Box. How come GST went up 1%, but your prices went up by $2? So how many percent is that? So I think there is some of that, but yeah, I think it's arguable. You need to look at the industry, you need to look at the specifics. Are you talking about raw materials cost? Are you talking about shipping cost inbound? Or are you talking about outbound logistics cost? or the cost of money, right? Interest rates are going up. So those of you who do inventory management, that means your cost of inventory is going up. But it's not actually the cost of inventory that's going up, it's only the finance cost of your inventory. So it's arguable. Last question. Wow. You know, I've worked in the industry for 30 years. For about 10 years, I used to be an educationist. And that's not an easy one to answer. But if I was still teaching logistics, and maybe I'm a jaded old man, you need to still teach the fundamentals. I still see graduates coming out there. I talk to them about calculating net present value, right? Or talk about inventory carrying cost, or talk about network optimization, or fundamentals around Incoterms. There are so many supply chain and logistics graduates who don't have this fundamental knowledge. So, yes, you can teach digitalization, you can teach about, all the new things that are happening, but I would also focus a lot on the fundamentals, the basics. If you get the basics right, and I've got some of my colleagues in the room that I respect a lot because they have the basics right, and then they build from that. So focus on the fundamentals and don't get caught up in the latest and the greatest. Maybe not the best advice, but that's what I would do. Because if you get the fundamentals right, you can build up from there. Last question?
Thanks very much, Raymon.
All right.
Yeah.
I've been now being told to get off the stage.
Ding, ding.
Thank you very much.
Don't get off the stage. You're staying up. Please take a seat. You're one of my panel members.